I'm Jackie Lemire, a member of the program committee of the Foggy Bottom West End Village. Again, welcome to the third presentation in the Art Thursday series. Today, I am very pleased to introduce you to Fanchon Silberstein, a writer, teacher, and trainer who has presented art and culture workshops around the world. She was director at the Department of State's Overseas Briefing Center, conducted workshops at the Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication, and ran sessions on conflict resolution using art at the Smithsonian Institution's Hirshhorn Museum, where she served as a docent for over 30 years. Without further ado, I am delighted to turn this over to Fanchon. Enjoy the time with her, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, where's the sound?
All right, I think I'm unmuted. Yes, Jonas, fine? Okay.
Now you are.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. And Jackie, I want to thank you very much for the idea to use the chapter in my book, Make Sense of the Senseless. It seems apropos for the times that we're living in right now. I wrote the book that the chapter is in, which is called Art in Sight. And in a moment, Jonas will show you the cover of the book. The chapter that we're going to be talking about came from an exhibition that very much inspired me that took place right after 9/11, when we were facing the kind of crisis in this country that both brought people together and fractured them. And among the 68 images, or 68 artists, I should say, that were represented in the exhibition, which was at Meridian International Center here in Washington, were those who specifically looked at American values. I'm going to hold up the little catalog just so you can see it, and I hope you can. It was called True Colors, Meditations on the American Spirit. And one of the reasons that I was so inspired by it is because a lot of my intercultural work has had to do with values, cross-cultural values all over, but specifically American values, which have shaped so many of us and are also, in many cases, highly individualized, depending on who we are, where we've come from, what our religious backgrounds are, and many, many more things. The other thing that just dropped into my lap a short while ago was a quote from Iris Murdoch, who some of you I'm sure are familiar with. She was both a fiction writer, but earlier a philosopher. And she said something that I think is very apropos of what we're going to be doing today. She created a dichotomy between what philosophy is about and what art is about. She said that philosophy has as its goal concretizing things and explaining them, which in a way sort of pins things down. Where art, by contrast, means to mystify and expand. And that mystifying, I think, is probably familiar to all of us, certainly to me, that there are images that, even though we recognize what may be in them, are painted in such a way or offered to us in such a way that we're puzzled by just exactly what the artist was all about and how we're supposed to respond. And the expansion part, the mystify and expand, really got to me, because what we're going to be doing today is looking at how art expands within ourselves. The whole objective of my book was to reach that point of understanding one another, and it was inspired by a quote from Marcel Proust that happily one of my students gave me, and I'm just going to read it. He said, "Only through art can we get outside ourselves and know another's view of the universe, which is not the same as ours, and see landscapes which would otherwise have remained unknown." We're going to be looking at 5 objects from several more that are actually in that chapter, chosen because they were meant to reflect something that Americans care about. There's the cover of the book. And what Jonas is going to do with these 5 images is give you a chance for 15 seconds each to just look at them. The titles are on them. Sometimes titles are a bit diverting, but in some cases they also, in many cases, of course, help explain and help us understand. I'd like you to take those 15 seconds to look at the images that he's starting to put up right now. Examine the surfaces as closely as you possibly can and try in your own minds to give words to those surfaces. Thank you. We're back to the first one, a picture that is called Prayer Rug for America, and it was created by Helen Zugaib, who is our neighbor here in Foggy Bottom. I found this image in the exhibition at the Meridian International Center before I ever met her. And one day she walked into, I can't remember whose living room, probably at Mary Kay's, where we were deciding things about the installation of the Foggy Bottom Sculpture Project. And here was Helen Zugaib. I was so overly delighted to just meet her. This piece, which is now in the Library of Congress collection called Prayer Rug for America, is composed, as you can see, in what we consider in this country patriotic colors, red, white, and blue. But I hope that in the few seconds that you had to look at this, that you were able to pick out some of the details. And by the way, I do want to add parenthetically, we had hoped today, before we knew that there would be about 70 people here, to have a discussion during the time that we're together. For logistical reasons, we are asking you to use the chat because we can't manage a discussion with that number of people. So your thoughts, your ideas, your reactions to anything that I'm saying, if you would please put that into the chat so that we can deal with it later, I would very much appreciate it. So what do we see here? It's a painting of tiles, but the tiles are made of ink and gouache. And gouache is a sort of opaque watercolor that Helen has been using in a lot of her works. We see squares, rectangles, lines. They're orderly for the most part, very geometric. And this gives us a kind of immaculate image. There is in the middle of all of this geometry a kind of curved form that suggests something else besides just mere geometry. To me, a mosque-like form or even a human form with a head and rounded shoulders. And then there are flags around that image representing the American flag, but they're not the American flag. If you can see, there are fewer stripes, there are no stars in the blue field, and yet it's highly recognizable probably to just about anybody in the world, but also certainly to Americans. And then the lower right-hand side, and in this reproduction, I'm afraid it's impossible to see them, are 2 tiny socks. which to me represent the presence of a human being in this image. The other thing that occurred to me and has occurred to others is that when you put together these kinds of geometric forms, you're creating a mosaic. And the word mosaic has a lot of resonance for many people, coming from Moses, the coming together of also diverse ideas, of diverse peoples throughout the world, a diverse mosaic of human beings. But Moses was also the receiver of the 10 Commandments, and the prayer rug, which has significance in another realm, is also a place where Muslims come to pray 5 times a day, where it can be a clean environment, no matter where you are. You can be on the sand, you can be in a building, and you can unroll this and pray on it. Muhammad was also a receiver. He was a receiver of the Quran, and it was said to come to him directly from the angel Jabril. And there was a chance that Muhammad was illiterate. So this was a true miracle. The patriotic colors, as I pointed out before, are laid out in a very orderly way. And the socks, once again, as well as the form in the middle, do bring in a human presence. So what are our reactions to this? This was done as a post-period from 9/11, when there was a lot of anti-Islamic feeling. And here is an attempt to take a very orderly design and bring us together by taking a look at the possibilities for healing. Our emotional responses to something like this are likely to be as mixed as the number of people looking at this. Are we thankful? Are we cynical? Are we reminded of things we don't want to be reminded of? And then in a more personal way, because some people were subjected to religious practice that they would rather not be subjected to, are they reminded that they were bored, that they had to say bedtime prayers that were either consoling or dull? Were they exalted? Were they agitated? The emotional reaction to a piece of art is frequently very individual and not necessarily completely related to the visual information that's in the work. But that's part of what's fascinating and what creates the basis for conversation. Okay, Jonas, let's look at the next image. Thank you. This is a very, very different kind of image. And just to make sure that we get the point, the artist has written the name of the painting right on it, All American Cheeseburger. To begin with the visuals, this has a brown top, a brown bottom. It has something oozy at the top. It has 2 brown things in it, and it has something in the middle that's sort of orange. Well, she's told us it's a cheeseburger, but if I were hungry, this is not exactly a cheeseburger I would want to grab. She's done something interesting here. She's bruised it a little bit. She's made it look like something extremely unappealing. It's not on a plate. There are no people around enjoying a delicious meal. This isn't glistening with the fat of the presumed hamburgers that are in the middle. And in addition, she's highlighted the side, our right side, stage left, with the sense that this is a shiny surface that absorbs the light. So this becomes almost another kind of object. But what was reflected on in the catalog, and also by other people who have shared looking at this image, is that hamburgers they're an important image in America. It's, as somebody said, it's coming home, it's comfort. It's the kind of fatty food that you crave after, when you're really hungry for one thing, but perhaps after something has happened. But it is something to be shared and enjoyed. And yet what she's doing here is kind of presenting us something that has, I would say, is missing its appeal. I want to pause with this image for just a minute because we're living through another assault, if you will. It's an assault from disease. And that may make you think of this in another way. And also to take a good look at what these colors are all about, because they're so different from the bright, more or less optimistic red, white, and blue that we just looked at. So what else could this possibly suggest? Okay, on to the next. This one is called To Be a Cowboy. It's by an artist named Kendall Page, who was very gracious to me at the time that I was writing and corresponded with me. I do want to say that all of the living artists read the pieces in the book and had to pass on them before we got permission for the images. So, and I had some very nice experiences as a result, almost all nice experiences. So here is a figure that is iconic in American lore. It's a figure in cowboy garb. We see him from the back. He's not working right now. He's looking at a line of cattle. He's holding a hand on a hip through which we see more of the far landscape rather than the new. And the skyline, the horizon, is severely cut by the line of cattle which are approaching him. He looks like a pretty attractive guy from the back. We have no idea what his face is like or what his expression is, but it is a sort of moment off duty while he's anticipating what that gritty work is likely to be when he has to start dealing with those cattle. The American cowboy is a very important symbol in our lore here. But what else is going on here? It's a pretty appealing body shot, but is this the ideal cowboy? Okay, the next image, please. This one is called Roadside Skywriting. It's more important that you see the top of the painting than it is that you see the title. I'll read it for you. It's Roadside Skywriting. It was done in 1989 by William Dunlap. So it was not done for the 9/11 tragedy, but it was included in the exhibition because of those two lines that are in the sky that are a jet stream. And what Dunlap pointed out, and it was certainly true for the sake of the exhibition, is we will never look at the sky with that kind of imagery with the same sense of the benign. But when he painted it, he did it with another objective, and that was to focus on our love of technology, the silver fuselage of the airplane that probably exuded this, that gave us something that we enjoyed looking at, that reminded us of something in American lore, if you will, about our love of technology and advancement that was very prevalent. What I want to do is look at the visuals here and then go back to the more or less emotional impact of this painting. In the foreground, at the bottom, are very strong lines representing a road. In first the road, then a line of snow, and then another strong piece that represents the rest of the road, and then finally more snow. And on the right-hand side is a very large bare tree. The tree is often a stand-in, though not necessarily in this painting, for the human form. The person both rooted in place and also, but also able to move. And behind that tree is a fence, but it's an open fence, a fence that seems to give us access, at least visually, to the land behind it. And it may be very hard in this reproduction to see, but on the left is a house. And in this snowy scene, that's a place of refuge. It's a place where people can go to warm up, to have perhaps something other than that hamburger for sustenance, and to enjoy being together. And this painting is very carefully constructed. As you can see, just above the first third of the painting, or first quarter of the painting, is a kind of blurry, dark area. We can't tell if it's an approaching storm or just exactly what is going on here, but we know that it's heavily shaded and dark. And then above that is something much more fiery looking, much more beautiful, maybe resulting from a sunset that's approaching. And then above that, the stark blue sky with the fuselage, with the jet stream that came from the possible fuselage that had just passed by. Yes, in the context of this exhibition, the even suggestion of an aircraft had sinister overtones. And I wonder now, in the year 2000, what else we bring to that. There's a paradox here because, at least in my experience, I've always felt fairly safe in an airplane. I believed that there were regulations, that the pilot, the person who held my safety, was well trained and was going to do a good job. Now, airplanes there are fewer of them are flying, but we're also wondering whether it's safe to fly. Can we get into those once safe places without worrying about the recirculating air, about the social distancing that's being required, about the presence of maybe one person who just has a slight cold in the same cabin with us, and what that would lead to. So looking at these things in a different time and place gives us a different way to observe them. I do want to say I have a very positive reaction to this, and some of you may, to the overall image and to my experience in gaining this image for the book. Bill Dunlap, some of you will remember, was around town for many years. It was a WETA program that later became just an insert for a few minutes between programs, where various critics in the Washington area would talk about art and music and theater and so on. And he was especially kind, I just want to say, when I needed to get this image, because it was in Mississippi framed, and he went there actually to take it out of the frame and provide the high resolution image. So thank you, Bill. Okay, the next image, please. This is done by an artist that some of you are familiar with. Her name is Faith Ringgold, and it's called Faith's Garden Party. The visuals pretty apparent. This is a group of people, let's see how many, I can't remember, 39, gathered together and obviously posing as though somebody is going to take their photograph. The other things in this image are the things that we love in our American backyards, and that's why this was included in the exhibition. The green grass, the bird feeder, the fish pond, and the kind of gathering of informality that we treasure, people wearing funny hats and colorful costumes. Faith had her own reason for bringing people together for this gathering. And embodied in this is her story, as well as the individual stories of the people who came. And the reason I'm mentioning stories now is that before we turn to the chat and go to the place where we'll share, I hope, our perceptions of some of these things, I want to emphasize the use of story. Every single image that you've seen just now, and all the other images you will ever see when I hope art museums open, carry with them a story. The most abstract piece that you'll look at has within it an embodied story. The story comes from the intention of the artist. If there's an accident in the image, it's because the artist intended to leave it, and that becomes part of the story. But when we arrive, and this is the expansive side of looking at art, we bring our own stories. And those stories can only become realized when we take the time to really look at an image and question what we're seeing. We may hate it. It may absolutely disgust us or remind us of something we don't want to be reminded of, or we may love it. And all of that becomes part of the greater conversation. In this case, these 39 people have come together to commemorate something that was very important to Faith Ringgold, and that was an organization called, I think it was called Anyone Can Fly, and these were a diverse group of artists that she was supporting who needed to have a form of recognition. But there's another aspect here that I don't want to leave this with without mentioning, and that is that it's done in folk art style. And it's an important part of American lore to be able to mention that right now, because we love our folk art. Actually, all nations, all countries, all cultures love their folk art. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's straightforward. It depicts the main events in life, our births, our deaths, our weddings, our coming together for various religious rituals. And it doesn't preach. It isn't meant to tell you what to think as much as just to say, this is who we are and this is what we look like. And this piece was put into the exhibition after 9/11 because it reminded everybody of how much Americans like straightforward depictions of their own stories, of the stories in other people. It's not that we don't read complicated literature or we don't do and look at complicated art. We do, and we're fully capable of going into that. But there is a sort of heartland, cowboy-like look at certain values that we think are really important. And one of them is to be honest and to be straightforward. And we know that that's belied in many instances, but nonetheless, something that goes back to what our deep values are aligned with. Okay, what I would love to do is look at the chat now. We're about halfway through, and get to your questions, your comments, your reactions, and then we can go back to some general things about art that might be interesting to talk about. Okay, Jonas?
Sure, would you like me to leave it on this image or scroll back to a different image? Actually, I'll scroll back based on the questions.
Okay, I think that would be useful. Yes, thank you.
Just a reminder, we've had a couple come in that are all very good, and I'll read them off in a second, but if you have any thoughts on any of the images, or you'd like me to scroll to one, just put it in the chat and I'll read them off. Someone said that the first one, while they're looking through a window at the prayer rug, sort of drawed me in. And the cheeseburger suggested overindulgence. And the fact that it's so big is very intimidating, someone noted. And the tree and the landscape seem to be reaching out to the viewer.
Okay, well, let's go back to the looking through the window at the prayer rug, which implies, I think, a certain distance from it. Would that be accurate? Also, it gives us a chance, since we're going back here, is to look at the association to just rugs. This is a very special rug, but it was chosen by an artist who decided to take nothing and make it something. And that's true of just about every piece of art that we look at. It begins, there's one artist here on the with us today who makes wonderful stitchery, but she starts with a piece of material and with thread, and in some cases pearls. And the result is something absolutely exquisite, but it isn't exquisite before she puts her hand to it. So the artist, in this case, had to conceive of an idea, but she basically started with just a piece of paper and some gouache and brushes. What was the hamburger. Okay, what was the comment on the hamburger?
The size of it sort of suggested overindulgence, and it's very large and intimidating.
Overindulgence. It's interesting about the overindulgence because this is loaded with cholesterol if it's a real hamburger. And it's also probably loaded with salt and a lot of stuff that our doctors warn us about. But at the same time, it can be absolutely delicious. And don't forget that this was made to remind people about the kind of food they enjoy when they come together at garden parties, as well as perhaps in restaurants. What else was there, Jonas?
Another one that came in regards to the couple for the Roadside Skywriting. The tree picture and the driveway and the Airstream remind me of the great physical distances of the country as sort of a good thing. The home is warmth as the base and the vastness of the land. Another person noted there seems to be a series of tracks, and I'll scroll down to it in a second, heading towards the house to contrast with the vapor trail. So those are sort of two comments on that image. Then there were more comments, but we'll get to those.
Yes, the tracks contrasted with up there in the sky, and that those ephemeral jet streams, which will disappear, of course, but the tracks may be a little more enduring and certainly more suggestive of people.
Yes, and then the space of the image, about how that sort of suggests very American, the vast open spaces of it.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's another kind of iconic idea here in America, in addition to the strong cowboy who is mastering that space in a sense, covers it, rides a horse, brings in cattle, creates the food, perhaps, that hamburger is made of.
A couple of people wanted to talk about the pose of the cowboy, and that he has his back to the viewers. And if you had any thoughts on why that was chosen.
I'm interested in everybody else's thoughts on this. I think what Kendall wanted to do was to show us the off-duty cowboy, to suggest that the most iconic of our images, this strong rider, this person who can master the environment, master large animals, also has an inner life, and that there's a moment when that can take place. Why did she capture him in this pose? This this image came to me at the same time as the film Brokeback Mountain, and I wrote about this in the book, was produced. And here were cowboys, strong men, able to fulfill all of the ideals of the American heartland, and they were gay, and they were punished for the relationship that they created between the two of them, because they were not accepted by the greater society of which they were a part. So it added complexity to looking at this image, because this is a guy with a beautiful body. And it was impossible to overlook that in light of this film, which at the time that I was writing this, I had just seen.
Someone else mentioned that might just sort of be tired, or how he's dragging his right foot a little bit. Maybe that is a message too.
Yes, and it's okay to be tired, right? If you're doing hard work. It's very hard to see in this reproduction, but he's also beautifully dressed. The chaps are very elaborate, and he's got a very fancy belt on. And from the back anyway, it doesn't look like he started his work because he looks pretty clean and unrumpled.
It's definitely the perhaps just sort of for show than that he's not doing the work, but he's like dressing like it.
Yeah, well, that's another possibility. Maybe this is mere show, just dressing up, pretending to be a cowboy.
A comment that just came in, and again, please keep sharing your comments, about the relationship between the hamburger and the cowboy. I thought of it as violent killing the cattle to eat the hamburger, sort of environmental concerns.
Ah, yes. Another piece of our greater concern right now is there are many environmental concerns, yes. I'm just looking at that title, which is part of the picture, All American Cheeseburger, All American. I'd love to know what people think about that title.
Another comment is image there are of exceptions, but not real people. Here we go. The hamburger picture incorporated the title as though it was scrawled on a blackboard, which is an interesting choice.
Oh, yes, it is. It is an interesting choice. And the black background has struck me many times. Yes, I hadn't thought about a blackboard, but that's a wonderful observation. And as I mentioned before, this isn't sitting on some attractive plate with wonderful knife and fork near it, or a drink or anything that would make this, shall we say, more inviting.
That it's sort of scrawled like a child, which was an interesting comment, I thought, if you had any thoughts on that.
Why do you think it's scrawled like a child?
Someone suggested that. So that's sort of it's not very orderly, that it's as if it's written on a blackboard in sort of a disjointed font.
Wonderful. Yes, it's not orderly. And we can rub things out on a blackboard, right? Replace it with something else.
And it's sort of it's fading a little bit. Perhaps that it's not as strong of image, that it's sort of fading away, the All-American Cheeseburger.
Great.
That's a comment.
Yeah. Yes, that fuzzy appearance, I think, is really on purpose. It's not a sharp image, and I hadn't thought of it as fading, but yes, not only has it come almost into focus, but it's also fading away. For what reason?
Both Katie and Emily.
It's still on the burger. It's sort of like a chocolate cake in excess and indulgence.
Excess and indulgence, yes. I think we have an obesity problem in this country. Is that right? Although if every hamburger looked like this to me, I don't think I'd be much attracted to it.
Someone suggested that seeing the back of the Cowboy is just a sort of rejection of the viewer.
A rejection, did you say? A rejection of the viewer?
Yes.
Ah. Well, that is, I think, an interesting observation as well, as we're not engaging with him. We're allowed to see him and think about him, observe him, but we're not part of him. We're not part of that life out there. Good.
Someone else also pointed out the burger itself, and that it's a beef burger, perhaps excludes people that don't eat that.
So issues of exclusion. Who gets forced out of the goodness of American life? And right now, because of Black Lives Matter and all of the other issues that are attendant to that, we have a lot of reasons to start thinking about that. And I just have to say, I'm very grateful for that comment, because this image has actually suggested that to me.
Can I ask why you picked these specific 5 images?
I really took another look after we had selected them, because there are others in the chapter that I think would have served us well. But these all really spoke to American values in the aftermath of the tragedy at 9/11. And the others were not necessarily unlinked to American values, but had a lot of other things going for them. I'll just mention one in particular that I so much did want to share today, but I felt did not quite meet the subject of what we were about just now. And that is a composition. It's a wonderful sculpture that's in the Hirshhorn that was done by a Colombian artist. Her name is Doris Salcedo. And she has been part of Human Rights Watch, but is principally an artist. And she's gathered together furniture that was damaged and left when drug lords overran farms and confiscated land, expelled, in many cases, women and children, because the men had already been killed in Colombia. And the piece that was composed in the Hirshhorn, or was composed and brought to the Hirshhorn, and which is pictured in the book, is a bedstead without the mattress, and positioned in it is an old armoire that's very pitted and beaten up. And adhered to that armoire is lace that is also somewhat torn, but is principally seen as women's work to make lace. And when you look at it as a whole, it looks like a gravestone, but it raised so many interesting issues, because without a mattress, the bed is not a place of comfort. So we could have, and maybe at some point can look together at some of these images that have very broad meaning worldwide and for many reasons. But today we decided to focus on American values. So that was the reason for choosing these 5 images.
I wonder if anyone else, not to move into more of a Q&A, but if anyone has any questions in addition to comments based on what you saw today. The comment about sort of general musing about how art will reflect our immediate national tragedy and the sort of current situations we're in now. If you have any thoughts on that.
I would love to hear what people are thinking. While you're thinking, I just want to go back to the idea of storytelling. That's the richness here, that we each bring our own stories to this. And that every work of art holds in it its own story, the artist's intention, but also means to evoke ours. Picasso said that no work of art is finished until the beholder gets there. And that's true of art that will yield both to us, but sometimes may remain very difficult to penetrate. But it does mean to bring us into their story and our story. And just one more comment about stories, because I'm very interested in that notion. It turns out, I heard from in a lecture on Shakespeare, that Shakespeare was also pretty hung up on stories. And that if you examine the plays, which I've not done, for evidence of this, you see it over and over again. But there is one thing that did stand out to me, and that is that, if not the last line, almost the last line in Hamlet, is when Hamlet says to his friend Horatio, "Tell my story." We're all eager for that. We want to tell our stories, and we want to be heard when we tell those stories.
One comment about how art is comforting, the impact that art has on a personal level by someone who spends a lot of time in museums, things like that. Was that part of the intention of some of these pieces, do you think?
Would you say that again? I'm not sure I understood.
Art as a comfort, as something that sort of impact on a personal level, comforting impact of art.
That is such a great question. The intention of art is not to comfort. It's so multi-layered. Remember that Iris Murdoch said that it means to mystify and expand. And if it has only that idea, then of course its expansiveness is limited. Now, that is not to say that some art isn't deeply comforting. I had an experience a few years ago doing one of my cross-cultural workshops where I passed out small posters that I had collected from the National Gallery here, and we were doing various exercises about the images that were there. And one of them, as I recall, was a Dutch interior, and I could see that one of the people, a young woman in the class, was just so drawn to this thing. And I, at the end of the class, typically would pick up the materials because I needed to use them again. And I said to her, I have a feeling this has very special meaning to you, and I'd like to give it to you. And she was so entirely grateful, and I was so grateful that I had had the opportunity to do that. Now, was this comforting to her? Was it evoking something in a past? Was it because she wanted to give it away herself as a gift? I have no idea. But we do have those deep connections to certain images. And when this happened, I realized it gave me an opportunity to feel good because I gave something away. But she was clearly having a very deep experience that had nothing to do with me or anything else that was happening in the classroom.
Thank you for sharing that. I have one more question here on one of the pieces and then a few general questions. What do you think the intention, or do you know, if you've talked to Dunlap, on this piece that we have on the screen now, the Vapor Trails piece?
The intention?
Yes.
I don't know when he originally did it, but he did make the statement for the catalog that we will never again look at what he calls skywriting or this jet stream trail in the same way after the attack, particularly on the Twin Towers, but everywhere else in America, or everywhere else that there was damage or lives were lost. I was thinking about that when I was putting this together, about the fact that we focus mostly on the damage in New York because it was so dramatic and because so many lives were lost. But the truth is that where each of us feel the sense of tragedy and the need for renewal is if we've lost one person or one thing in our life has been severely eroded. Jonas, were you going to go to some general comments?
Yes. This is a good question, I thought. What will be the predominant form of art as a result of the pandemic? Art that can be produced at home, collective art, online art? Do you have any thoughts on how the pandemic will affect art?
Oh, I think it will definitely affect it, but I don't know. What's wonderful is that there are artists in our lives because they take in things not maybe so differently than we take them in, but what they give back to us is highly creative and, to me, completely unknown. But I think we're going to be seeing some really interesting things.
What was your background that prompted you to dig into this art insight as a book? Was that one of the questions?
I appreciate the question. You'll notice that the title of the book is a pun. It's art insight, but with little in and big sight, meaning both, that art is in sight, it's everywhere, but that its value only arrives when we come to it with our own insights. I'd been doing intercultural training for many, many years and ran the relocation program, the Overseas Briefing Center for the State Department. So we were sending principally American people, of course, abroad. But after I left, I was part of a team where we worked with multicultural population who was relocating. And then I became a docent at the Hirshhorn, and I was there for about 30 years. And what I realized is that there was nothing more profound, no better way to enter the consciousness and realities of other people than through the things they make. And with a colleague, we started to write intercultural training using art. And it was a challenge because the people that were signing up were doing everything in the world. They ran human resources programs, they were bankers, they were heading up linguistics department, running student exchange programs. It was just a wide variety of things. And they were looking for new ideas. And were very challenged by the idea that we were using art because everybody walked in feeling like they needed to know something. But the truth was what they needed to do was to establish a relationship. I found a wonderful quote that's in the book and that I've referred to so many times from Gertrude Stein, who said, "Description is all." And because I don't come at this as a scholar at all, I realized that being able to describe something, which we can all do, you can pick up a pencil and describe that pencil and start to see it in new ways, that we could all do that and then move closer to some of the deeper aspects. The other thing I want to say about that is that I think direct experience is the way to go. We need to see something, taste something, smell something, walk through something to have it have meaning to us. And then we can go back and find more about it. It may be fascinating to read a scholarly book on Rembrandt, but it's really good to start by looking at Rembrandt and then read the scholarly book. Look first.
Thank you. That's a great answer. We have, again, a couple more minutes if anyone has some more questions, but I'll ask one last one that came in the chat and see if anything else comes in. But do you think, this is a comment someone made, do you think art has gone too far in discouraging people, that it's sort of become too hard to interpret in recent years?
I can certainly sympathize with that question. I have walked away in confusion from more stuff, and I know that we all have. I had a semi-amusing thing happen after the book launch. Friends of mine took a trip, and they were in a museum, and they were looking at a piece. I think I know who the artist is. This thing is flat on the floor. It looks like nothing. And they sort of shrugged their shoulders or waved their arms. We've all done it, rolled our eyes and walked away. And then one said to the other, "Wait a second, let's go back and describe it." And they did. And they came to something as a result of the describing. So yes, we're frequently put off by stuff. Not everything is wonderful. Not everything is ever going to appeal to us. But that's why that question about consolation or beauty is highly relevant. We should be looking at things that we enjoy and that are a quick take, that are a gorgeous garden or wonderful food or people that we're drawn to. That's a very important function of art. But it also is about really complicated ideas. I'm taking a class now on German Expressionism, and these are people who lived through wars, the devastation of a society, hunger, and a lot of ugliness, and it's reflected in the art. You can't dismiss the art because it reflects that. You probably don't want to hang it on your wall, but it's there in very complex and interesting ways.
Someone noted how they use art to teach, to get participants to tell their story, which I thought was also a great idea.
Yes. Yes, and sometimes the most personal things are also the most universal. And we don't always know what those personal stories are, but I've had the experience, especially in working with the aspiring mediators, conflict resolution people who were not, they didn't have backgrounds in art, what they were able to discover in having an active conversation with each other by looking at the details in a piece and then subjectively asking what could be the purpose here, where could this thing be going, and actually in some cases arriving at exactly what the purpose was. At other times it just led to a very rich discussion.
I think this is a fun question to finish on, unless anyone else's last thoughts, but what art do you put on your own walls?
Well, good question. Anybody who's been over here will know that it's, I suppose I could say a mishmash, but my husband was a painter and very, very interested in landscape and water. So there's a lot of that, but we also lived in Asia, and so we have a lot of images from Asia on the wall as well.
Great. Well, I guess we could fit it. This is a harder one, but this can wrap us up. But how does a viewer know if there are symbols being used, or how do you decipher some of those things?
That's a super question. If you're looking at the Renaissance or the Northern Renaissance or earlier, symbols are really, really important. You know, the color that the Virgin Mary is wrapped in, the meaning of red in a picture, the particular flower. The symbols can definitely enrich us if we study them. So they play a big role. There is a lot less, probably a lot less symbolic evidence now in the art that we're looking at, but so much of it depends on our rich engagement that we create our own symbols in a lot of ways. I think that's an overly general answer to a very specific question, but I think the answer is that it's both important and maybe not so relevant in a lot of work.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that just about wraps it up. I want to thank everyone for attending. I know I certainly learned a lot and was, I don't know, I'm going to look at art really differently from here on out. So I just definitely want to thank you for such an informative talk. And I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that. I will be posting this in just a few hours on the YouTube page if you want to look at it again or share it with anyone else or look at any of our past events. And I'll send out an invitation to our next Art Thursday event in a couple weeks featuring Lynn Katz's fabulous photography. So I hope to see you there, and thank you again for joining us.
Jonas, I just want to also say my own goodbye. I know several of you who are here today. I'm so grateful to you for showing up, and also want to say that I really, my big regret here is that we couldn't have a live conversation. Those of you who I do know, and I know this has to be true of others as well, bring a great deal to this subject, and it would have been fascinating for us to have a conversation. So maybe we will at another time. I hope so. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fanchon. That was wonderful.
Thank you.